As I mentioned in a previous video, this stuff can be taken out of a mould after about half an hour or so, depending on the piece that you're working on. But that doesn't mean it's rock hard after that time and you can't do anything with it. The piece might be slightly misshapen, any one of a number of things that can be a little bit wrong with the way it actually comes out of the mould. So I thought I'd show you some of the things that I actually do that might actually help you sort of correct those little issues. So this one's a little bit out of shape, it's not quite as round as it could or should be on that side. So I'm just going to adjust this back in a little bit. Now if I was trying to do that cold and I was just to squash it, the likelihood is if it's fully cured that it will actually snap. So to get around that, there's a couple of things you can do. One is to actually submerge it in hot water, and the other way is to actually use a hot air gun. And depending on the thickness of the piece you're actually working with, you'll find that one method may work better than the other. With the thin wall pieces like this, I'd probably recommend a hot air gun. With the thicker type pieces, I'd recommend the hot water method, where basically you're putting them in and letting them soak for an extended period of time, so the heat's got time to actually permeate through the thickness of the material. The material does have a certain degree of a memory to it, so if I was to actually squash that to a point where I've sort of overdone it, I can actually repeat the process, make the adjustment again. So to give you an idea, so I don't want to overheat it, I just want to heat it to the point where that becomes a little bit softer. You can see how that is coming back into place where I want it to be. As soon as I get it to where I want it to be, cool it down in the cool water, and that will lock the shape into place. It's as simple as that. If I was doing a larger piece or a thicker piece like this sort of thing, I would put it in hot water and I would soak it for an extended period of time. The water temperature doesn't need to be scaldingly hot, somewhere around 45 to 50 degrees Celsius. And again, depending on the thickness of the piece, I would just leave it in there and test it periodically until I was confident that it could bend without snapping, make the adjustment in it, and then once again quench it in the cool water. Another reason why heating up the piece can be quite beneficial is when you're actually cleaning up seams and removing bits and pieces that you don't want. You can still occasionally get a little excess of resin left behind in some of the seam lines. This process of heating up the surface to actually clean it up can help for those sort of areas as well. That'll probably still need a little bit more cleaning up with a hacksaw blade to actually deepen it and even it out. But that gives you a bit of an idea on how easy it is to get out once it's warmed up. To give you an example of what I'm talking about, the top piece you can see there has an excess that has to be cut off. Firstly, if I was just trying to cut that with a standing knife, you can see that that is quite hard to actually get through. If I heat it up, however, it doesn't take very long for that to start becoming more rubbery, which means just as if it was rubber, that will cut a lot easier. The same applies for a seam area, a very slight seam. So if I run my hot air gun along that, it will soften up just that area. Just that quick burst of heat makes that very, very rubbery and very easy to get rid of. And you can see here where the flashing has actually continued between those two pieces. And that is quite well set and brittle. So if I started trying to break that out, I stand at risk of actually breaking the fingers themselves. So again, because this is much thinner, that's where heating it up again will take any risk away of me breaking the fingers when I go to trim these pieces down. You can see it doesn't take much for that to become quite rubbery. And I can just peel that out like that, and it'll tear. And then from there, I can start going in. I'd probably use an X-Acto knife, a little stencil knife or something like that more commonly, but this is just a quick demo to give you an idea. When you come to clean up little imperfections in the mould, there's a number of different patching compounds that you can use, from carbog to different types of putties. There's a super glue method that I mentioned in a previous video, but the one that I found to be absolutely best, and it's not always going to be available to everybody, when you're actually pouring the moulds themselves, once you've poured out the actual liquid, you'll invariably have small amounts of the mix either left over or still coating the inside lining of the bucket you used to actually pour them out. And what I found is, as that leftover bits of resin start to set, it makes for the best type of patching material you could possibly hope for. There's a little bit that I've put on there in excess so that you can see what I'm talking about. The resin being what it is, it bonds perfectly to the underlying piece. And the other aspect of it is, because it is the same material, you're not going to have any transition issues when you actually sand that back. So those little bits of leftover resin, as they start going off in the bottom of the container, and apply them to the other pieces as you go, without a doubt is the best option as far as patching is concerned. Depending on the extent of patchwork the piece needs and where it's located on the actual piece, things like the carbog filler work quite well and will blend in fine once it's actually undercoated and prepped for painting.